Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's a nice, small, intimate group. My name is Puja Vaish. I'm the director of the Jehangir Nicholson Art Foundation, and I've curated this Raza exhibition titled Zamin Homelands. Today is the closing event of this exhibition, and of course, I could think of no better person to help us bring this exhibition to a close than Roobina Karode. Roobina doesn't need any introduction to this crowd, but she is the director and the chief curator of the Kiran Nadar Museum in Delhi. Um, I think some of the most comprehensive and soulful kind of shows happen at the KNMA, and I always look forward to every Delhi visit to make sure that I see what Roobina has curated. She has a very interesting way to read artist practices where I feel like she's able to really internalize, the artist's process and really make people connect with the artist practice. And I think as museum curators, that's something that is really important to be able to relate to the artist and relate those thoughts to larger audiences. And I think Roobina does that really, really beautifully. So I'm also really honored and delighted that Roobina is here. She's come all the way from Delhi to see the exhibition, and also that she agreed to do this event for us. So thank you and welcome, Roobina. Thank you so much for being here. It's really, really an honor. Roobina has also just concluded her own Raza exhibition that was happening at the Bikaner House, which is organized by the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art. And it was also a really interesting exhibition because just the body of work that Roobina was able to bring together, the way it was displayed, and it really sort of was something that a lot of people spoke about. The opening was amazing, and I went for it twice, right in the beginning and also right at the end of the show. So this conversation we thought would be interesting because it's also Raza's centenary year. It's been 100 years since Raza's existed. It's also the museum centenary. So that is why we sort of thought this would be a good idea. Mr. Mukherjee was like, why don't we do this Raza exhibition? And I thought it was a great idea. It was also pushed by Shanti Chopra and Sangeeta Chopra of Art Musings, who actually really pushed me to curate this exhibition. I felt very daunted about curating a show of an artist who is, so like such a huge personality. And there are so many people who have spoken about Raza that it was somewhat of a challenge to find a sort of interesting hook and a different way to look at it. And I think that's what's interesting because so many shows of Raza have happened this year because it's the centenary year. And I think that's what's interesting because, the way that you can read an artist's practice through so many different ways. And I think like the show that Roobina had curated had a very different sort of focus. Of course, it's the same artist, so there are kind of overlaps, obviously, the ideas in some way, but still just the way of looking. So that I think is quite interesting that there are many ways you can kind of look and curate shows or look at an artist's practice. So just with that introduction, I think Roobina will also speak a little more about the show that she did in Delhi, and maybe we can discuss ideas of how you thought about it and this, and we can have that sort of conversation. So thank you, Roobina, and I'll give it over to you now.
Thank you, Pooja. First of all, congratulations for your new position. And I'm actually very happy when I have intimate groups of people because I think it is so personal then. So not to say that more people are not welcome, but I think I like that from time to time. I think it comes from my days being a teacher for too long, where I enjoyed those intimate conversations, which would go on for endlessly. But I'm very delighted to be here this evening. I'm also in the presence of to people whom I totally admire and I'm in awe of. So here is Mr. Mukherjee and here is Saryu Doshi. And they have done incredible amount of work in the field of art and culture, which is completely, I can only say that I can tip my hat to you, which is what I can say. But I think, yes, I think it's so, I feel very privileged and honored that I am so closely living in the world of artists and living in the world of art, which has completely shaped and transformed, I think, what I am as a person within myself. And I think that is something that I really value. And as Puja said, and this extraordinary exhibition that I'm seeing, for which I really wanted to come because tomorrow is the last day, and I thought I'm going to miss it. I'd heard great things from Ashok Vajpayee, from my own colleagues who had visited, and I just felt that it's very important to really see how artists are viewed or artists are presented, interpreted, and also how one revisits their work, and always there is something else that one finds. There is an element of discovery which happens, and I think even artists are not aware what they leave behind. They don't fully know what they have left behind. So sometimes it's also about connecting many of these dots which are left, or threads that are left, just open for us to get into it and get into this mesh of things, and which I find very fascinating an exercise to do, especially with Raza. I think it's been a great year. The Centennial exhibitions or Centennial year has had also Akhilesh curate a huge exhibition which was in 3 spaces in Delhi of artists generations who have been inspired by Raza. And so has Jaisal put together Goonj, which we saw today, which is also very interesting take of what young artists or artists who are really working in the mode of abstraction or still lured by abstraction. What are they doing in grappling with this kind of genre or this kind of a pursuit, so to say. So I am actually what Pooja said, and briefly, what I'm going to do is maybe I'll just show you a 1-minute film of a video of the, since many of you could not see that show in Delhi, which I will start, but I want to just give you a little background, and I think after that we can just have a conversation. I want to tell you that Pooja said it rightly, that I have looked at it very differently also for 2 reasons. That I had some really very intense conversations with Raza when he was alive, because I most times landed up to interview him for a piece that I was writing, either in a catalog or in a newspaper or something. And that's how my understanding of Raza, in the way that he talked about his work and about his universe, started to shape up. Subsequently, also being a student of art history, we were extensively taught about the Bombay Progressives somehow. They really were the people the artists to look at. I don't think Calcutta was given that importance. I don't think Madras was given that importance. And now, of course, we know that that's not true. I mean, there was a lot happening in other parts of India. But somehow the concentration was on these 4, 5, 6 minority people from minorities who ran away from home and had a great story to tell, because they left home at early age and they all landed in Mumbai, which was the city of dreams. And that's how this formation of the Bombay Progressive, and each one decided. And it was also the time of independence. So this was a great exhilarated moment also in terms of declaring a creative independence or a creative freedom along with political freedom. And this emancipation that, yes, we are now, on our own, and let's make our struggle, our pain, our collective, pain and struggle, let us really put it forth and let us show the world. And let's take India to the international map, which is why I think doors opened to really scholarships that took many of them to Paris, many of them to London. And this exposure outside India also made them look and reflect at India very deeply. This is a very interesting thing that happens even in the case of Raza, who really lives half his life here, maybe, or less here. lives half his life in Paris, but he's this dual belonging and also a kind of a very conflicting, in one sense, thing that when you're in Paris or when you're in France, you are constantly thinking of your homeland, Zamin, India. When you're here, you're also thinking about what you were doing there. And these kinds of, these passages of time and place, how that really influenced him was the starting point, and I think that is also the starting point in this exhibition. So in the exhibition that I curated, I made three gateways in one sense. So I was trying to present the first gateway or the first phase of Raza, so to say, was about exploration of place, which is what looking at landscapes, looking at places he was visiting, because he was constantly journeying, from a small village to a town, then from a town to a city, then from a city to different cities, and from different cities to another nation. This is a very interesting trajectory of our journey of an artist, expands also the notion of space. Because this is your village, this is your town, this is then your city, then this is your nation, then this is your international map. It's those concentric, like his concentric circles, his space is expanding, in the geography that he was working. And that also became very interesting to look at in the first part of the exhibition where where young Raza is experimenting. And I wanted to really at that point only talk about what he was painting and how he was learning to paint, which was the first phase. So you would see that side by side, I juxtaposed three different kinds of styles that he was referencing to. One came from miniatures, which he was very interested in, how miniature artists in our, in the lineage or if you go back in time in India, were so extraordinary in their understanding of space. What you perceive as space and how you translate that space pictorially into a small little page or paper, and that was something that comes through in many of his very jewel-like works, where he's trying to create these vertical perspectives and, multiple perspectives, so to say. Another phase was thick impasto. So when his encounter with Paris happens, then he's so much in love with Van Gogh that he's crying in front of Van Gogh's paintings. As you will see that in his diaries and his comments all the time. But what he was really doing was just opposite to the very diluted paint of miniatures, of many of the miniatures, or the flat application, he was doing thick impastos. Okay, and actually creating with great fury, spaces, very instantaneous brushwork, so to say, very brushwork of fury, so to say, and thick paint, really layering it. If you see many of the works out there, the first work there is so full of sumptuous paint. The pigment is really almost like, and we have heard that Van Gogh literally used his fingers. He used to squeeze the tube on the canvas and use his fingers to create the cypress tree or the wheat fields and things like that. And then there is a third phase. So there are three kinds of stylistic learnings and referencings to understand what he was portraying, which then becomes a space, which is a very intermediate kind of a working, which is not completely the gestural style, which is not completely the miniature control lines and, zones, painterly zone style, but something in, an intermediate one. And that becomes very important for me, I feel that, because I start looking at how he is now trying to present what he's looking. But just going back quickly to one point, because I think Puja can also, when she joins me, she can talk. I have always felt it is something very interesting to talk about, and maybe somebody should do a research on this, which is when modern artists started painting post-independence decades, a lot of them were so inspired and taken by cities. Cities, the modernizing factor of city coming into their lives, the making of the city, okay? Why the seduction of the city, the alienation of the city, everything is there. There's seduction, alienation, population, all this. There's so many facets of the city become very important. And most of them, you name it, Hussain, Raza, Ramkumar, Padamsi, you name it, all of them went to Banaras as a city. And it's not just the modern city of Mumbai that was fascinating. They went to many different cities and many cities. They traveled together. Hussain, Raza, many of them traveled to Rajasthan. So there are many paintings by even Raza titled Jaipur, Rajasthan, Saurashtra. You see these, names coming up. And I think, what is it that they were looking at? It could not be so simple as just to paint a place. This is my query to myself. It could not be just so simple as that, that they wanted to capture the throes of life, okay? Or like we read here that where he was born in Madhya Pradesh and to a forest officer's house, he was so fascinated by and also feared nature because his father used to tell him at night to go alone home. So his father would stay back in the office and he would, this little child, would traverse this kind of a terrain to go back. And the forests were so mysterious. Nature is so mysterious. In the day it is something else, in the night it is something else. This whole fascination for Prakruti, so to say, or nature, that was the starting point, and we see a lot of landscapes that he paints. But then when he shifts to cities, the cityscapes, whether they are in India or in Paris, it's very fascinating to see what is it looking there. And one of the things, Puja, I find very interesting is his cities are totally alienated of people. They are not peopled at all. There are no people in his cities. Whether he's making Gorbio, whether he's making something else. So and many times the cities are captured at night. So there will be a dark or black paint that he uses, or sometimes the cities at sunset, okay, with the church bell ringing, things like that. So I'm quite fascinated at understanding what was it that he was drawn to when he was making these, when he was looking and painting at what he calls the retinal painting, which is what is your eye looking at, what is actually there, from where he then exits, isn't it? So the second gate, as I say in the exhibition, comes to his movement or his shift from a very nature-based abstraction to a symbolic abstraction. And how does he do that? Okay. So what does he leave behind, and how does he come to a stage like this? Okay. So a lot of paintings of land, for instance, La Terra, Bhumi, Paisage, many of those, they talk about his great interest in the idea of land. Of course, as you mentioned, partition really destroyed his family. His family had to shift to Karachi, and he had to stay back. His first marriage broke because of that, because his wife went away to Pakistan and he could never go. And then they were just, shooting letters to each other. And finally, that relationship crumbled. So many things are associated with that time when partition, this separation of land or this amputation of land did for him. This fragmentation of land, what does it mean? And how do you hold your hold your homeland with you? How do you take it with you, let us say? So how do you, when you shift to Paris, or he lived in London also, he also went to the United States, how do you carry your homeland? And as everyone talks, Zarina talks about it, Raza talks about it, the only way is to carry it through memories, isn't it? And so memories become extremely important as you go along. So that is the second phase. And the third phase, when you enter, is the phase when he goes towards, where he starts from going back to a moment of trance or an epiphany, which he realizes in Paris one night, and the Bindu appears to him, which was also the Bindu that was in his life much before, when he was a very restless, distracted child, and the school teacher used to punish him by making a Bindu, a dot on the wall, and telling this little child to stare at it for hours. Now, this is a very, very over-publicized story, but I'm not going there. I am interested in what that Bindu meant to him. And a lot of people do qualify him as a landscape painter or an abstract painter. And Raza, if he was alive, would refuse both. Okay, he would say, I'm not, neither. What would he say then? He always said, I'm not an abstract painter. If you go close to my painting, you will see titles, and the titles explain my position. I'm talking about titles as germination, bhumi, kundanili, bindu, bindunad. You can go on. Okay. Now, there is this element of metaphysical abstraction, so to say, or esotericism, or if you call it what is it called? Not just metaphysics, it's called mystical abstraction. And I was more interested to explore that, which started from one of my conversations, which I've never shared, but today I'm sharing it here in an intimate group. I asked Raza, I said, and he got very furious also. Let me add that also. I asked Raza, you have always given statements that you know Bhagavad Gita very well, and he does. He used to say slokas like, I was damn impressed. He would just be able to, speak shlokas like that. He could talk about the Upanishads, remembering pages on which what he read and all that. So I just asked him that it should not have been so difficult for you to move from form to formlessness, coming from the culture that you come. Okay, that in Islam, you start as a child, you are trained to believe in something which is unseen, an unseen God, so to say. So you don't know the form of it, okay? You have never seen it, you have never drawn it, okay? But you know that there is a God, there is a power, okay? And you start looking at this articulation, it becomes so real to you that if you are ill, oh God, you don't even know where, what, who, she, he. You don't know anything. But you start relating with something which is intangible, an unseen force, and such strong faith drives you. So this faith word has been extremely important for him. So I asked him only just one question about this, that how does your background come into your work? Does it come in your work in any way? And the second thing I asked him was, you have written a lot about what you have studied in Hindu philosophy, in Upanishad philosophy, many things. You also use text of that kind. You use a verse also. But I've never seen you use anything which is coming from, let's say, maybe in somewhere you would have tried to write Allah, or somewhere you would try to write something else, Yeah. And his first reaction was, मैं डरता था. So I said, किस चीज़ से? Because this can be a very political answer, मैं डरता था. But then when I probed further, he said, if I would have tried to, and he has, by the way, only 2 paintings Ashok Vajpayee knows of this small size. In one which he has written like Om ki jagah Allah, or ek kuch aur. Yeah. So he said, at that time, if I would have chosen that kind of an abstraction, I would have been relegated to a calligrapher. Okay? Because calligraphers were the people who scribed. The scribe wrote text. Okay? And I'm a painter, and that would have not worked. I would have been relegated to be a calligrapher. And I didn't have anything to offer in terms of what I could have articulated, in this culture. But I don't say that I don't get inspired. Now, this is a very fascinating story. His father was an extremely religious man who taught him namaz, who taught him everything, but was a very liberal man. And I feel that is so important in understanding his trajectory. When he was 6 years old, where he lived, there was a temple. They were taught to do prayers in Islam, and then they would just jump the fence and go and matha tekao in the temple. And they were spending so much time in the temple that is how he got fascinated by understanding Hindu philosophy and Hindu religion. And because his father was liberal, they started this whole idea of a very, what should I call it, a very assimilative kind of religion, or an assimilative kind of faith. came very early in his life. So he could actually recite the Quran, but he also learned the sloks of Gita. He could actually, sit down to, and have a conversation with the mullah, but he could also be sitting and praying in a temple. And that's how Surya Namaskar and many other paintings come into his life. And then when he goes to Paris, he marries young Janine and he starts attending the church. So he becomes he is somebody who went without fail to the church mass. And that is very interesting of this artist in terms of when you talk about how his faith then drives him into some other direction. Okay? And all of this, to just stop all of this, he had a prayer that he said every day before he entered his studio, which was neither this, neither that, neither Christianity. It was Rilke's poem. He used to read the French poet Rilke's poem and then enter and start painting. So fascinating are these stories, just to put into a background of how he started working. And I think this kind of a cultural assimilation becomes extremely important to talk of Raza, because the more you read his diaries, Dhai Akshar, the more you read about what he was writing. He was a man who was very well read. He was a man who lived intensely, and he's a man who must have read poets from Ghalib to Mir to Iqbal to you name it. Too many others, his Hindi was very good also, Hindi poets, plus English poets, French poets, because he used to write in French also. So he had this worldview come from experiences which were so profound. So no doubt a man with that profundity would look at the everyday very differently, who would really understand the world, or who wants to understand the world more deeper, or unveil it through his own work. This unveiling of many of the layers and veils that the world has, that happened to him gradually. And this is where that epiphany one night when he's sitting in Gorbio, restless, aimless, he realizes what his direction could be. And that's when the Bindu comes into his life, and then starts another kind of journey. So when you come to the third part of the exhibition, you see Bindus of different kinds, different interpretations by him, his own diary pages, his own verses that he wrote, the way text started coming into his work, the way music started inspiring his work. And those kinds of things become extremely important. Where he's not just a painter, because when you talk about Bindu Nath, he's talking about the sound of the universe, isn't it? The cosmic sound. Okay? So he's not just a visual painter then. He's taking a lot into consideration. He's responding to a lot of things, and those things start coming into his work. And lastly, because I think this needs to be short so that we can have a conversation. Lastly, I want to tell you one thing, that it was not just the terrains that he was inspired by, they were definitely very important to him. He was very drawn to water. And he talks about how even in 80s he was writing that Narmada Mata bolte the wo shayad, Narmada Ma. Narmada is actually still flowing in his veins, and how fascinated he became to the idea of water. And then he started, his explorations on water started. In fact, his explorations on all the 5 elements began then. So from nature to Prakriti, to breaking it down to 5 elements of nature, and here, such a painting is all 5 elements are here. There is fire, there's air, there's water somewhere deep, there's land, all the elements are here, okay, by the way. So he started looking at it as 5 elements of nature, and then came to water, and water became extremely important. And I was wondering a long time when I was looking at his work, I always thought, what did it mean to him, and why in the blue works of a particular phase, he starts using a lot of blues in his work, he starts using a lot of triangles in his work. I see few works here of those kinds, but when you look at those. And I was trying to read this in many different philosophies. You know, the mystical philosophy came from Hinduism, or it came from Islam, or even from other Semitic religions. And I realized that water has a great role to play. So if I just give a small example, because I may not go into the whole theory here, but if I just talk about a simple idea of the cosmos and how we understand permanence and impermanence, even of ourselves, okay? And if you have visited any, I will talk at the moment only of Islamic monuments, because I'm just restricting it to that. So if you go to Taj Mahal, so to say, or if you go to any other monument, wherever it is, you see water bodies. And this is not just only of Islam, Islamic monuments. You would see that kunds are there even in, you know. Why is water so important? One, of course, it is a primordial element. We know we all came out of water. You know, water is important. We live because of water. What happens to us when you're dying? All the parts of us which are wet and moist start drying up. Whether it's a mouth, whether it's eyes. There is a very long cosmological history and study about water and its primordial element and how we are born out of it and how we go back to it. But I'm just, one moment, if you just emphasize and I talk about this. So let's say Taj Mahal, it's not even a shrine in that sense, but still it has water. So what does water do? Water will, one thing it can do is, it can become a mirror for you. So Taj Mahal is looking at its own beauty, you can say, because there is water, and in water there is reflection. Okay, and so the Taj Mahal can be in vain because it's so beautiful. Okay, it's seeing its own reflection. Okay, but at the same time, in the architectural space of this, how these charbagh concepts are created, how notions of paradise are brought down on earth when religious buildings are built, why the mandala is important, why the consecration of the ground is important, why the distribution of spaces is important. I just want to draw, that is one way to look at it, but the other way is, it's a very, very profound way. So, I'm again talking about the Taj only. It will look into its water, it will look into the water to realize it is standing there very solid. But the water is not solid. The water always keeps moving and shifting. And the shifting of the image tells you about its impermanence. Okay? Now, this idea of the impermanence is grounded in Islam, so it is so well grounded that, as you must have heard, even when you go back to the Egyptian stories, when the Pharaoh is made king, what does he desire? The first thing that he desires is to build his tomb. Because he wants to build his tomb so that he may not be there, and when he's alive, he can shape it, okay, so that he will be housed there. But he thinks about his mortality, but he also thinks about how he can be eternally there, okay. Now, this idea of permanence and impermanence, this idea of is completely rooted in nature, in cosmos, in the universe, and therefore it is not restricted to any little one part of the city or the landscape. It's a very profound thought about how, as an artist, I'm experiencing this world. What are those little intangible changes that are constantly happening in the world, in me? When I look at the mirror, what is today a wrinkle, tomorrow another wrinkle, another gray hair? You know, it is something, it is so grounded in life itself. And this is where, when you start looking at his paintings, where there are multiplications of images, it is also it's also reinforcement of the fact that you can never see the world from any angle or any vantage point as complete or definite. It is changing. It is like the sound, the concentric circles, okay? It is like breath. You know, you're not aware all the time that you're breathing, but you know that your breathing means there is expansion and contraction constantly happening. It cannot stop for a moment, but you're not aware of it all the time. Okay, but it's part of it. Now, this duality, this kind of a understanding comes through in his works of the last phase, which is where the square as the terrestrial ground and the bindu as the point of the beginning and the point that is takes you to infinity. This is very, very profound in Raza. And I feel that Raza, that is why he could continue. Look at all the paintings that you have put here. Somewhere the black bindu is somewhere above the horizon, somewhere in the middle of the horizon, somewhere it has occupied the entire universe space, somewhere it is like a black sun on the landscape. It has so many kinds of representation. It can't be any one representation. It has a multitude, and you will never be able to complete this picture. You will never be able to see it from the totality is denied to us of this world. We will never, till we live, we will never be able to comprehend this universe fully. This is what he has done, that divine. And that's why I ended in my exhibition ends with a very diluted form of painting, which you have also put one at the end. Yeah. Alok I have put, which is divine light, so to say, the power of light. But when he is talking about light, all the colors have gone. He has actually made it just white, literally white, and it's all these colors, they've just gone. So from that black bindu to alok, which is pure light, that is how I ended the journey. Thank you so much. I can just show the all the three gateways have three words I chose from his diary. So you will see rhythm, repetition, and reflection. So then there will be three, or yantra, mantra, tantra. Three words taken, and each gateway. So the first gateway tells you. Okay, the first gateway tells you silence, conscience, and one more term is there. So on the gate, so in one sense that was a preparation, and it's also one way of saying this is how Raza must have moved in his life, because most times the people say repetition kitna hai kaam mein, repetition hai. Okay, but then repetition is so important. We must not forget, repetition is extremely important. If you chant and not repeat words, you're not going to reach the level of contemplation that you want. You are chanting, and whatever you're chanting, You are that incantation or the kind of reverberation is the word I use. Rhythm, repetition, reverberation. The echoes, the repetition leads to rhythm, and rhythm leads to that kind of a reverberation, where you start here. Even when you're doing yoga and you're shutting your ears and nose, and then you are actually listening to that echo in your head. Now, so these little things, I think there's also a small painting somewhere where he is referring to the yoga, which he was, and Ashok Vajpayee told me that till the end, he was every day sitting and, after he would have spoken about Rilke or said the prayer, he used to at Raza Foundation sit there and start having his long brush in his hand and move it. And often he used to, I think this idea that he wrote very early in his life, stillness is death. So in that sense, he was always journeying. But he was also journeying within. It's not just the journey outward that happened in the initial stages, but he was so much journeying within. Okay, that journey is those stations that you cross, to reach somewhere. That was happening to him, and I find a lot of energy in his work. The work has energy, the work has movement, the work has, even when he's making those triangles, there is a geometry about it because he moved to geometric abstraction, from nature to geometric abstraction, but they are not still. If you watch them, the concentric circles also moving. And what is most beautiful is the circles are not drawn as complete. I mean, the finish is not complete, so every edge is left imperfected. It's quivering. So it's not like you've just drawn a scientific diagram. And I've tried to paint Raza because I started as a painter. I thought, this seems very simple. It just means to draw a square and a circle. So take a compass, draw a circle, and I was trying to be like Raza somehow, how you look at and I could not do my painting looked so bad, looked like a flat diagram, which also was not a good diagram. And I was realizing, what is it that this painter does that makes everything feel it is still vibrating? It's a vibration of the cosmos. It is an energy of the cosmos. This is something. He surpassed his technique at the end of it. All the references he started with, at the end he found a language in which he could actually create those reverberations and what he wanted to say about the oak. It's the continuity or the rhythm of the cosmos. He could capture it.
Yeah, thank you, Roobina. Actually, that was what I was hoping that you'd bring also into the conversation, and your curation. Because I think that's one part of Raza that if you read many texts on Raza, like I was telling you also, it's very kind of obtuse and esoteric in the way that that whole spiritual and mystical aspect of Raza's work. So it's almost like instead of sort of explaining the work or like trying to find inlets into the work, sometimes that almost creates a wall. But I think with Roobina's, the way that you internalize his practice and also the different philosophies that he kind of so engaged with, like varied from east to west to different religions and all of that. So that's the part I think where the shows are very different and offer like, very different kind of inlets into Raza's practice. And for instance, for me, I feel like, there's some very beautiful things you said even about the form, about how the line moves. And I was noticing that in most of the works, actually most of the works that are displayed here, except for Seine-Port, which is what he did in France, he actually applies the paint really thinly. Like it's a very thin, and if you see these works in photographs, you feel like maybe it's a thick impasto, but it's not. And the other part that you said about the dark and the light is also how he's left parts of the canvas white, which I find very fascinating also as a painter, that he's able to do that very masterfully. It's also a very European thing to do. That, you know, if you leave canvases white in places, the sort of brightness that you get with that canvas is very different from if you actually paint the color white, and you see that all over. But also I was thinking about, you know, this whole adopting or like getting into different philosophies. And I also was trying to look at it in a kind of historical sense. You know, with, of course, independence and that whole league of artists, the first Indian artists were, of course, the first organized group was the progressives, which luckily even you haven't touched on too much, even I haven't. I've tried to do it only through the letters to also bring them down to earth a little bit. You know, because when you see their letters, you really get to know the sort of camaraderie, the insights, the fights, how they diss each other, and really kind of make them look like a bunch of, you know, people, just young people trying to make it out there. And interestingly, I think the historical aspects quite crucial there, because they were like the first artists in a way representing India, right? Like India has just been formed 1947. They call themselves the progressives. You know, it's about what should the expression of our country be. It should be at par with like global art movements, which is why you see in all the progressive artists, as opposed to say a KG Subramaniam or whatever, like this idea of a universal language, which is why in this show I've actually included that also, you know, KG Subramaniam's scathing critique on the progressive. So you should read that note over there, where he's totally dissed them. And it's interesting because this show also looks at them, like Roobina so nicely put out the whole story of Raza, you know, and that's pretty much how this show has been done, not chronologically, but also to, you know, see that whole idea of migration. And what you were talking about, I think you were saying something about why they needed to do place, you know, like so many of them did depict the place. But I think it's also to do with the time, right? Like this whole idea of mobility, where one is able to travel for sightseeing, for like building your career. And like Raza's story is literally that he is from a really humble beginnings. His father is a forest ranger. He's grown up in the forest. And how he finally reaches Bombay is also quite a story. It's not an easy sort of, you know, transition for him. And of course, when he's here, the kind of different people that he meets, from Crazy Souza, from his letters, to Hussein, and all of these people. So I was just trying to see how that art developed, you know, and also their experience as the first diaspora artist, which is just a fancy word for people who live abroad or went abroad. But as in like the first Indian artists who went abroad, you know, and you see this with so many, like you see this even in our families and friends, people who, that tendency or to try and hold on to something, be more rooted in your origins, and sometimes are more traditional and more ritualistic than what is practiced here, than what they've left behind, you know. So I was wondering if all of these things also, in a way, to Janine and lived there for 60 years, he said, I am not giving up. So I feel like all of these, and it also has a lot to do in a way with his own religion and identity, you know. And yeah, of course, he did imbibe all these cultures. He did it in a very beautiful way that came across in his practice. But I also see I see a similarity between him and Hussein, because they both did that. You know, they both adopted more of the sort of Hindu iconography. Even in Hussein's work, of course, it is completely different. He didn't paint landscapes. So, of course, it's very interesting how Raza manages within total abstraction, find forms and find references. So the one thing that Raza did was actually to claim abstraction for India in a way, you know, one of the artists who did that, to say that my abstraction is, you know, referenced heavily from Eastern philosophy, and that in our you know, place, we've always thought in terms of the abstract, whether it's the sound, but the things that he referred to was Om and, like, you know, those kind of things. And to the fact that, to speak to the fact that conversation you had, which actually is pretty important right now when you think about it in that context, which is why I thought it was very important to feature this one. And in his work, you don't see that religious identity so much. In Raza's work and in Hussein's, you know, Raza's work, like you said, there's just one work which says Allah, and he of course explains it to say that it's calligraphy. Yeah, that it is calligraphy. And there's just this one work which is an early work, which is of the mosque. You know, there is just that one work. But I'm also wondering whether it's also the time that you live in, you know, whether it's difficult to exist like that, or what is, you know, to find a way to just exist in the world, you know. And for Raza, I feel maybe that was a way out, to, you know, have all these kind of different references that come into it, to say that, you know, my abstraction's got nothing to do with the European abstraction. It is, and interestingly, though he lived in France for 60 years, and all these paintings, actually, if you see from here onwards, are when, so he's already moved to kind of abstract form when he is in Europe, because that's all the rage there. That's what he's seeing. He's seeing all this post-war art. He's seeing, you know, American abstractionists, and it's heavily inspired by that. And the level of experimentation that you were also saying is amazing when he's in Paris, because each of those works over there are like as if they're done by, or like completely different artists, you know, literally. All of those works that you see, they look, each one looks like it's by another artist, it's not by the same artist. So you see that period of real experimentation, which I find very fascinating. And also then, from here onwards, then when they start becoming more fiery, is actually when he feels that NRI experience, probably that diaspora experience of, you know, that the need to have your own identity that also speaks about your own origins. And of course, it's to do with that idea of separation, you know, from, you know, your childhood and from your people. So you're living this dual life. And that's where he starts coming every year from the 60s to India. And he makes sure to go to a place which he's left behind. Like, he has not been back to Madhya Pradesh and to those small places, to Kakaiya and Mandla and all. He has not been back there for most of his life. It is only in the 60s that he then decides to come back and goes to the school and goes to like Nagpur and goes to Damo and goes to all these places, you know, to connect back. And then of course that story that is over popularized about where did the Bindu form come from? Ha, my teacher told me is Bindu par dhyan do. Ha. So
Here is Hussein. Some people say, thank God Hussein didn't leave the country. If he had gone, he would also become an abstract painter. See, why they say this is because he always said to the press, in India, how can you do away with the human figure? आप आँख बंद करोगे तो भी लोग दिखते हैं. I mean, इतने लोग हैं यहाँ population. How can you do away with the human figure? So even though he went semi-abstract, quasi-abstract, okay, in his represent, he could never do away with the human figure. And of course, he barefooted walked the nation. This was one of the things everybody did. Indian identity. देखने के लिए, it's not enough to be in cities. It's not enough.
it was performative.
Cities are modernizing, you know. Where is the real India? The real India may be in the villages, in rural pockets. All of them went and talked about mysteries they found in Banaras and in Rajasthan ki galiyon mein. And you know, we've heard these stories. Which is why I feel that even though Raza was sitting in France, he was constantly thinking, well, how will I carve an identity? There are so many French impressionists, abstractionists, you name it, you know. My identity is, when I turn towards India, and I look at these very important abstract philosophies, it's a treasure trove. I mean, let us say India has been such a rich civilization. You can, even today, I think, if there is a way to go forward for people in the universe, they will have to look at what India has dug and found, what they have searched, the philosophies, the mysteries. And I think one of the things that must have struck to him is, unlike the West, which is so scientific driven, we in the Eastern civilizations are still very, what do I say, not comfortable, but accepting of mysteries, accepting of that the cosmos cannot be totally known. Even you can say, you can do experimentation, but you will not always find answers by asking why, because there are not answers beyond a point. Beyond a point, words can't go. Beyond a point, knowledge can't go. You just can go through some other, That is why he used to say, when I'm in front of a canvas, I just feel that it is the most privileged position for me in this universe, and it's also the most challenging, or the most exhilarating, and most also troubling, unsettling, because of this, because you don't know what this will shape into at the end of it. You can dematerialize land, you can abstract land, you can abstract forces of nature, you can abstract the cosmos, but the end of it, you're still seeking till the last day, and it's not going to reveal itself completely. This is the beauty of the universe. Today, that West is realizing these things. But at that time, and I think this is why these people, in fact, Lakshman Pai I interviewed, because I was also doing an exhibition on him, and he was in Paris even before them. He lived there 10 years earlier than them. He actually played out the Indian identity to a T. He used to even dress when his openings used to happen, he used to be the most different person in the crowd. Okay, he would make it a point that people identify he's from India, and Souza, who was otherwise so obstinate and whatever you want to call daring and outrageous, he, in all his earlier works, he is sitting in London and painting Goa, his native land. This is how you have to see how interesting this is. This whole trajectory of these artists, on the one hand, were compelled to find a modern language, because they were in the times after independence. So that was one struggle. But at the same time, an identity, and what will that formation of identity be, and through what factors? That is another story. And then where they reach is another story. So it's a quite a fascinating.
And actually, it's interesting because all these works, when he started coming back to India and going to his villages and all, it's interesting. And this whole section of photographs is actually that, to just show. Just to show his, because I found in the Raza Foundation, there are millions of photos of Raza, of course, but there are so many photos where he's actually on the ground, he's on the Zamin. And I think photography also tells you a lot. So if he's traveling, so he comes back, he's going to, like, say, his mother's grave, or he's gone to all these places, or he's gone to Sanchi Stoop, or he's gone to Bhimbetka. And if you see the photo, you see his stance and how he is there. He's not a tourist. He's kind of planting himself really solidly, even if it's a tourist site, In Bhimbetka, he's there in sitting in the cave. That's how his photo is. Everywhere, if he's there in India, it's all like, this is mine. That kind of whole performance was of his Indian identity was very much there. Of course, it was an emotional connect also for him, but there was also this whole aspect of ceremony. Like when I was asking Mr. Vajpayee, he was like, every time he used to come to India and he used to reach Madhya Pradesh, he used to like get out and take the soil and put it on his forehead and all. Like there was this whole performance around, the identity. Like you're saying that this Ambadas now what. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That they like Lakshmi Pai would dress up differently. So they all had that kind of thing. And I think another thing I wanted to touch upon was also like, and I find this both again, like, and I think it's interesting to compare also Raza and Hussain, though their art was very different and how similar in certain ideas it was, because Hussain was also someone who was totally touted as the state artist, right? If any person on the street will maybe not know Raza, but they will know who MF Hussain is. And the reason for that is because he became like the artist of India. And there's very specific, of course, I mean, because maybe of his minority identity, also the stuff that he was painting, because he kind of really played into that idea of India in terms of, the mythology or the kind of things that he was portraying. And I feel for Raza, that played out in his references. Of course, he made his references much wider with Rilke and all of that. And in some places, like I said, like the church and the mosque and all of those. And also these abstract works where he is very specifically looking at the landscape of his childhood. Like he says that the first few years of a person's life is what's most defining, and that's his explanation for why the forest landscape of his childhood was that. And then later on, actually, there are a couple of works that are on this side, which is a phase of Raza which I don't really connect with a lot, but I think it's important, in a museum show, especially, like, stylistically, they are not as, what do you say, like, considered really great works. But I think that whole, it became like extra nationalist, his work, So there's a work called Satyamev Jayate, there's another work called Nav Bharat, and these are all in the later part of his life, where it kind of becomes very, very simplified, Like I find the whole period between the 60s, 70s, you see this whole internal struggle. You see all of that, between a past and a present, between a rural and a urban, between landscape and water and, the idea of India, nation, and as well as your international identity. And then somehow, it reaches this pinnacle with the Bindu works, which for me actually took a really long time to really appreciate in a very real way, because I feel like when you're taught it in art history or whatever, if you see Raza's work in books, I feel like you can't really tell how it is. If you stand in front of one of those works, like the one that's when you just enter the large square Bindu work, that's when you like actually kind of see the way the colors balanced or what has been left, or like you said, that idea of the breath, that shaky line, because those are things that you don't really, see there. And some of those are fascinating in terms of just how he is kind of been able to be so, like, there's a full emotion in it. You can tell that he's trying to really portray emotion, which is another aspect that I was trying to cover in this show, is that even the landscapes that you see up till there, till the blue, are different from this, where you see it's gone to, like, it needs to say something more than a formal language, abstract language, or like just or of course, like the earlier works, which were just dispassionate, distant views of streetscapes, But here, then, what you can see that there's a lot more going on that he wants to say, that whole thing. So that actually is very interesting to me. And in a lot of those works, that sort of fieriness is then retained, and in a lot of those Bindu works. And then the later, somehow it all, just becomes like the kind of over resolved, work. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Gradually that language towards geometry, and then a distillation of emotion, feeling, whatever you. So this distillation process actually takes time.
Yeah.
And I think even sometimes he has also talked about a landscape which is disintegrating, which means he's breaking it into elements,
Yeah.
which are the actually primal elements,
Yeah.
the five elements.
Yeah.
So it's like that.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
This to me, when I saw it, literally like like I think this is the work that I really connected with Raza after coming to JNAF a lot more with this work, because it's just I don't know if it's just the scale of it, but also the way that it's just painted. It's literally like it's on fire. It is like burning, you know, with the way the the colors are, the black and the washes and all of that. And that whole idea of Zamin, then so many works from that time are called Zamin, or this one's called Later or Tapovan or The Forge, you know. And
What I feel that the younger generation of artists whose work we just saw in Booms, sorry,
yeah,
I feel somewhere there is a need, a direction that is very necessary. I've been spending a lot of time since I did Nasreen, since I did shows on abstraction. So many people send me their works on abstraction, you know, students, artists. And sometimes it feels that everybody cannot really distill that idea of abstractions so well. Yeah. So when you see some works, they tend to become like diagrams. Yeah. And if you put them, like if you would put a work of someone else, let's hear, you will immediately understand, yeah, how powerful, yeah, and how what the potential of his work is, yeah, in terms of the language, yeah, that he's coming to. Now this thing, that there is a need to, not to say that you can't have art for art's sake, not to say that you can't use geometry without meaning, but if you started thinking about forms, like Santosh had another take on Tantra, okay, or Prakriti and, man and women, male and female principle. He had another take on it. Somebody, if you start thinking a little bit about how you're thinking, what is leading you to that formal abstraction, whether it is coming from architecture, whether it is coming from nature, whether it's coming from something else, then you will be able to pursue it for 60 years or 50 years. This is my understanding. Otherwise, it's a very difficult language to work with, because what happens is you are stuck to the idea of elemental forms or shapes. You say square, triangle, this, that. You constantly want to work around those. But you have found a way to work, but you have not yet processed the emotion or the direction or what you're seeking through it. Till you do that, you will not be. That is also one reason why in the West, a lot of work does not appeal to me, because I sometimes feel there is so much play on empty formalism, you know. But these artists' works are not empty of content. You sit with them, they will tell you more about content and less about form. You know, they will tell you exactly. माँ प्रकृति क्या है तो आपको रजा will talk for 4 hours. Okay. On the other hand, if I'm sitting with, let's say, anybody who, because I spent 3 years there in doing my Fulbright, I sometimes have felt, why are they doing what they're doing? Okay, if somebody was able to move me by that answer, you know. So I sometimes feel this is where these artists appeal to me even when their time is over, because at the moment, time is over in the sense we are revisiting them. They lived their time, okay. We are now seeing them with new eyes. Our another generation, our younger people will see with another eyes. This is why it is that we can still find something. If it was empty of content, you cannot go back to the work. This is what Mr. Mukherjee was saying today also about the digital world. No, I found that a very fascinating point. You know, you will go to a movie once, maybe twice, maybe thrice. What after that? In comparison to that, if there is an art object in front of me, or an object, just an object, even a stone from, I just visited Stonehenge, I could not leave from there. I mean, even if that is there, it is, I cannot tell you, it draws you so strongly That is because there is something more to it. It is not just a empty shape or an empty form. It has inside meaning. It has something more to give us. It is exuding some power. It is exuding some energy. It is a life force that is being conveyed. This is where I had a real problem in the US, especially because I can still go and fall in love with Morandi and with Van Gogh and many others, Rothko. But when I'm looking at what is happening now, I don't know how to appreciate it. I'm still finding a way. Learn.
Five elements you talked about.
Yeah.
That you don't see in virtual art. You see only.
Yeah, you're right about that, yes.
And they completely lack sense and sensibility.
So correct. That's what. So, I mean, I really want to tell students when they come to me, it is very difficult to. I can't be like KG. He was he could cut anybody to piece. But I mean, being a teacher, for me that is not the approach. So if somebody comes with great enthusiasm, okay, so I'm cutting paper, I'm weaving paper, I'm creating this form, I'm creating this. I also want to add something to say that yes, but always try to find the soul. Because if art cannot nourish our soul, what will nourish it? If music cannot nourish it, what else can nourish it? This is where the whole thing boils down to. It's not about saying India is full of color and so color has come. Nahi re Baba. If he didn't want color, he can even make a completely black painting. He can make a completely white painting. He can make a completely monochrome painting. It's not about that at all. This is a reductionist way of saying in India there is color and so these are colorful artists and colorful painters and I don't know what all is said, That is not the way. So if you can, this is where my respect is coming from that position. Okay, that they did. Nobody can sit 60 years and paint, just if they had no purpose at all. Who can do that? Nobody can do it. You have a purpose, so you are able to sit here and work the whole day and night because you have a purpose. You are doing something purposeful. You are seeking some meanings in life. You want to leave behind something in life. It's an extraordinary thing, to be an artist. It's and live that life.
Yeah. I was just going to say we can maybe open it up to the audience if there are any questions.
I was just going to talk about this us generation that grew up. We were young when independence came. I was in my teens. Not even in my teens, But after independence, there was a surge of feeling of confidence within your own culture and the desire to show it. So what, as young girls going to school and college mainly, what did we do? We shifted into wearing handlooms. We shifted into wearing saris instead of dresses. That was our denial of the Western influence and pride in our own culture. And it was like we saw those with Ranis and Maharanis and French chiffons, and we would negate them by wearing handlooms. So that was the mindset at that time, to sort of reverse inwards and take pride in their own culture. And I think these people went further by taking it into philosophy.
So I saw your exhibition at Bikaner, and I had seen Raza's work before, but the experience that you have curated, I was in tears by the end I reached Amber. Thank you so much for that. I have two questions. There's only one painting where he painted a girl.
A portrait.
Portrait, yeah. So that was, you're saying he was so devoid of human figures per se. So do we know why that one singular?
That was his girlfriend.
I reckon, yeah.
And I kept that near his picture, just a little part. So that to also prove that
also to prove that little point.
Also, because academic study for art is like, human study is one big thing. There's nude study and all of that. So it's not like he never painted. Obviously, in college he did.
He chose not
Yeah, but chose not to. Yeah.
to. And some of the works have the pencil marks still on. Is there any reason why?
No. I think it's. I think this is what I was also looking in this work and trying to see what he's doing. So I think the moment he decided that he was going to dematerialize form, let's put it that way, in a simple, he was then playing out the process very differently. It's like saying that when we are teaching in school, I shifted from art into education because I was very fascinated by teaching. And the first thing my professor asked me was, is there a way to teach to draw? And I was very confused why he asked me that. And I realized after a few conversations with him, what he was trying to do was he was trying to tell me there is no linear way of teaching a child how to draw.
Right.
The child may first paint and then scratch on it. Would you say it is wrong? Or would you say it's okay? What would you say to it? Okay? So this learning, of how in art making, linearity, it's not a physics book.
Right.
First mass, then energy, then this. It's not that linear, so to say. And maybe some physicists sitting here may say even physics is not linear. But I'm at the moment saying how I learned physics was that.
In case we have to compare. Yeah.
First lesson will be this, then liquid, gas, and whatever mass. But so for him, he was playing with the idea of how to learn, to break conventions while he was learning his own language. And that is why somewhere he's written about these yellows that you see, very sharp, how he turns paint not into form but into light. He's turning them into light, isn't it?
Yep.
He's learning to make paint behave as light. A very powerful thing.
I'm a behavioral analyst, so for me, this question comes from the process that you follow. If you want to showcase somebody's work, how do you approach it? I don't know whether it's the right platform to ask this question, but how do you approach it?
That's a very difficult question. Some other time they can show. And I've not really thought about it. Every time it's a new thing, isn't it? Every time it's a different challenge.
That's what we began with, because that's what, that's sometimes the fallback of, like art history sometimes is not that reliable in the way that it's been written about so far. Because sometimes it aims to over-explain and kind of, put like one way of looking at things. But it really depends on what you're looking at.
Yeah,
So,
because large part of today's conversation was about his growth and his journey,
Yeah.
which is about his personality and his behavior.
Exactly. So
which
that
is
was
so
something that was very important, like also being a student of art and having this kind of barrier in really like approaching artists' works which are like this, because it's just taught in not a right way. But if you actually think about the time that they lived in, what was going on in the country, in the world, what were the things that drove their personal decisions also. Like for Raza, for instance, imagine your entire family is wiped out. All your siblings are in one shot in a country that is suddenly new country, which is an enemy land, and only communication that you have then is through letters, which some of which we've even tried to feature here. But then that's like another idea of your own worldview that shapes your worldview. Like here, there's a place that is, there are people you love there, and there's all of that, but there's this like forced distance also that comes in. So that was one thing. And also, like you're saying about the figure, it's interesting because I was trying to see where, like there's only in that first painting where you see, but again the figure is kind of insignificant. The color wash of the like the Bombay landscape, they just become like dots and lines. And I was wondering if in this painting it might be overreading, but I was, as a painter myself, I was also thinking like it feels like it's trying to come together to build something and say something. And like Rubina put so beautifully, like, turning paint into light.
Light, yeah.
And he always talks about this fire and darkness and all, which he attributes again to his memory of the forest. And I found, like, to me, it looked like, it's almost like shadowy figures or something around a fire, like a single point, fire in this work. And there's a very famous quote by Raza where he's talking about his memory of the forest. And there he talks about the human, that in that particular time when first time when he talks about the forest, it's in one of the first interviews where he's actually spoken about this. And there he's talking about his memory of the nights in the forest, like Rubina was saying, he was just sent out into the forest and all, about the Gond tribes dancing around a fire.
Okay.
So I was just trying to see, it may or may not be, but it's another kind of reading. Yeah. It's like completely broken up the form.
Yeah, you have a form,
Yeah.
but you're
Yeah.
making it,
Yeah.
invisible. You're making it energy. It's not form.
Yeah.
You're making it. But I've just said towards the end, say only one thing. In my curatorial practice, I have been drawn a lot to some artists because they become like great inspiration for me just talking to them. I haven't had that opportunity with Raza so much, though I followed his work because but I've written a lot about an artist called Himmat Shah who lives in Jaipur, and I was there the other day. He was celebrating his 90th birthday, so I had gone to Jaipur, and he told me one thing which completely shook me up in the sense. He said, क्या क्या कमाल बात है जिंदगी, लोग जीवन को समझते नहीं, जीवन बहुत महान चीज़ है, ओके, पर देखो अब 90 इयर्स हो गए, अभी थोड़ी थोड़ी आंखें खुली है मेरी, और जाने का समय आ जाता है, थोड़ी दृष्टि जब आती है, हिम्मत शाह, अभी थोड़ा सा देखने का अवसर, थोड़ा समझ आ रहा है कि दुनिया को कैसे देखना, अब जाके दृष्टि आई है तो जीवन खत्म हो रहा है. Says it all. I was like in goosebumps, okay, just listening to that. My God.
That any curator, he or she, when curators show with his or her interpretation, the way they look at things, but they leave enough space for visitors and future curators to reinterpret, and they actually they provoke that this is our interpretation. That doesn't mean that you agree. You can disagree and you can reinterpret. Yeah.
That's how we are talking today. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.